London is a city divided. In the West End, wealth and power flourish, pristine streets lined with grand buildings, gentlemen in tailored suits, women in elegant gowns. But in the East End, in the slums of Whitechapel, it is a different world entirely. Here life is cheap. The air is thick with the choking stench of sewage and sweat. Rats scurry through the gutters, feeding on scraps tossed from overcrowded tenement windows. The people of Whitechapel exist in a constant state of struggle. Factory workers, laborers, beggars, and prostitutes, all scraping by on pennies. By day, the streets are alive with movement, but by night, they belong to the shadows. The gas lamps flicker weakly against the thick London fog, barely illuminating the narrow alleyways. In these darkened streets, anything can happen. And in the late summer of 1888, something does. August 31st. The morning is still and cold when Charles Cross, a cart driver, makes his way through Buck's Row. The sun has yet to rise, the sky a murky gray. He's walked this path countless times before, his boots clattering against the cobblestones, his mind lost in the routine of early morning work. But today something stops him. A shape on the ground. At first, he assumes it's a pile of discarded rags. A common sight in these streets. The homeless often sleep where they collapse, too weak from hunger or drink to find shelter. But as he steps closer, his breath catches in his throat. This isn't a sleeping vagrant. This is a woman. And she isn't moving. Her name is Marian Nichols. She is 43 years old, a woman who has lived a hard life, bouncing between workhouses, pawning off her belongings for a night's shelter. But now none of that matters. Now she is just a lifeless body sprawled in the dirt, her skirts lifted, her throat cut so deeply that her head is nearly severed from her body. Blood pools beneath her, dark and glistening in the dim light. And then the worst part, her abdomen has been slashed open, her flesh carved apart with a precision that defies explanation. Cross hesitates for only a moment before calling for help. Another man, Robert Paul, soon arrives. Together, they stand over the mutilated corpse, the weight of realization pressing down on them. This isn't a drunken brawl gone too far. This isn't the work of some desperate thief. This is something else entirely. The police are summoned, their footsteps echoing in the quiet dawn as they arrive on the scene. Inspector John Spratling kneels beside the body, his expression unreadable. He has seen death before many times, but not like this. Not this level of brutality. The cut to the throat, the deep gashes across the abdomen. It is almost clinical, almost practiced. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Word spreads quickly. A woman has been butchered in the streets of Whitechapel, and no one saw a thing. No witnesses, no suspects, no clues. Only a corpse left out in the open, as if the killer wanted it to be found. Fear creeps through Whitechapel like a disease. Women, especially those who walk the streets at night, begin to whisper among themselves. The ones who make their living in the darkness, the prostitutes, the outcasts, tighten their shawls around their shoulders and walk a little faster. They've seen violence before, but this is different. This is worse. Days pass, and the fear does not fade. If anything, it grows. And then on September 8th, just over a week later, it happens again. This time, the victim is Annie Chapman. She is found in the early morning hours, her body slumped against the steps behind 29 Hanbury Street. Her throat is cut, just like Marian Nichols. But the mutilation is worse. Her abdomen has been cut open, her intestines removed and carefully placed over her shoulder, as if arranged on display. The killer didn't just murder her, he dissected her. The police scramble to make sense of what is happening. This isn't random violence. This is a pattern, a method, a mind that works with purpose. But who could be capable of such savagery? A butcher? A surgeon? A madman? The newspapers seize the story, feeding the growing hysteria. Headlines scream of a monstrous killer stalking Whitechapel. Speculation runs wild. The people demand answers, but the police have none. And then the letter arrives. The Central News Agency receives an envelope, inside of which is a letter addressed to the authorities. The handwriting is neat, deliberate. The words are chilling. The writer mocks the police, taunting them. He claims responsibility for the murders and signs the letter with a name that will be etched into history for over a century. Jack the Ripper. It is the birth of a legend, a name that will come to define terror itself. And he is only getting started. It is just past 3:30 a.m. on August 31st, 1888. The streets of Whitechapel are mostly empty, save for the occasional drunk stumbling home or the early risers heading to work. The thick London fog clings to the buildings, swallowing the gaslight's weak glow, turning familiar alleys into endless tunnels of shadow. A cart driver named Charles Cross walks his usual route through Bucks Row, his mind fixed on the day ahead. He is accustomed to the sights and smells of Whitechapel, the filth, the desperation, the occasional figure slumped in a doorway. But something catches his eye. A dark shape sprawled across the cold cobblestones. At first, he assumes it's a bundle of rags, discarded and forgotten. But as he moves closer, his breath catches in his throat. It is a woman, motionless. Her skirts are hiked up around her waist, her body unnaturally still in the dim light. Cross hesitates. He has seen drunks passed out in the street before, but something about this feels wrong. Another man, Robert Paul, approaches, noticing Cross standing over the figure. Together, they take a few cautious steps forward. Paul kneels, pressing a hand against the woman's cheek. Cold. Too cold. He touches her wrist, searching for a pulse. Nothing. She's dead, he mutters. But then an uncertain pause. Or maybe not. She's still warm. They don't know what to do. Reporting a dead body means time spent with the police, questions, suspicion. Neither of them wants trouble. After a brief exchange, they decide to find a constable and let him handle it. Minutes later, Officer John Neal is patrolling the area when he stumbles upon the body. His lantern sweeps over the scene, and that is when he sees it. The throat, slashed so deeply that the wound gapes open, nearly severing the head from the body. Blood has pooled beneath her, staining the stones dark. But there is more. The abdomen. It has been cut open, deep slashes exposing raw flesh. This was not a simple robbery gone wrong. This was not an attack of desperation. This was deliberate. Precise. For a moment, Officer Neal stands frozen. He has seen plenty of violent crimes in Whitechapel, bar fights, drunken stabbings, domestic quarrels turned deadly. But this is something else. This is a level of brutality beyond what he has ever encountered. The body is soon identified as Marian Nichols, known to friends as Polly. She was 43 years old, a woman who had spent much of her life struggling against poverty. A mother once. A wife, before her drinking became too much. She had been living in workhouses and on the streets, scraping together enough for a night's lodging through casual prostitution. Hours before her murder, she had been seen at a lodging house, laughing, claiming she'd earned enough money for a bed. Yet, somehow, she found herself back on the streets, back in the darkness. And that is where she met her killer. The police begin their investigation, but there is little to go on. No witnesses, no suspects. Just a body left in the open, as if displayed for all to see. The brutality suggests someone with knowledge of anatomy, perhaps a butcher or a doctor. But there are no leads, no fingerprints, no blood trail to follow. The case stalls before it even begins. In Whitechapel, murder is nothing new. But this one feels different. Days pass, and the whispers grow. Women begin clutching their shawls tighter, walking in pairs, avoiding the darkness. The newspapers pick up the story, stirring the fear already growing in the hearts of London's poor. And then, just over a week later, another body is found. The Ripper has only just begun. Whitechapel is still reeling from the murder of Marian Nichols when another body is found. The fear that had been creeping through the streets now grips them with full force. Women who once moved freely at night now hesitate at every shadow. Conversations in the pubs and workhouses turn to speculation. Who could have done such a thing? Was it a madman? A butcher? Someone they passed in the street every day? The answer, they will soon learn, is far worse. It is the morning of September 8th, 1888. The city is barely waking when a man named John Davis, a resident of 29 Hanbury Street, steps into the small, enclosed backyard behind his lodging house. He is an old man, used to the squalor of Whitechapel, but nothing could have prepared him for what he is about to see. A woman lies stretched out on the ground between the fence and the steps. Her dress is bunched up around her waist, exposing pale, lifeless legs. Her head is tilted to one side, her eyes open but unseeing. At first, it looks like another case of a prostitute murdered in a drunken rage. Tragic, but not uncommon in these parts. Then he sees the throat, slashed so deeply that the cut nearly reaches her spine. Blood has soaked into the ground beneath her, dark and thick. But it is what has been done to her abdomen that sends a jolt of horror through Davis's body. Her stomach has been ripped open. Her intestines, instead of being left inside her body, have been pulled out and placed over her shoulder, arranged with an unsettling precision. This is not the work of an ordinary killer. This is something methodical. Davis stumbles backward, his breath coming in short gasps. And then he runs. He bursts out of the house, shouting for help, for the police, anyone who can make sense of what he has just seen. When the authorities arrive, they are met with the same gruesome scene. Annie Chapman, 47 years old, a woman who had once been married, once had children, once had a home. But now, she is nothing more than a mutilated corpse lying in the dirt. The police immediately begin questioning the local residents. This time, there are witnesses. A woman named Elizabeth Long claims she saw Chapman earlier that morning, around 5:30 a.m., speaking with a man. He was standing close to her, his face partially obscured by a hat. She heard him say only a few words. "Will you?" And then she walked on, never realizing she had just seen Annie Chapman in the final moments of her life. Another witness, Albert Kadash, who lived next door, reports hearing something strange around the same time. A muffled conversation, then a sudden thud against the wooden fence. A noise like someone falling. He thought little of it at the time. Now, he wonders if he had been just feet away as a woman was being butchered. But there are no clear descriptions of the killer. No one saw his face. No one knows who he is. Only that he is out there, moving unseen, striking in the early morning hours before fading back into the fog. The newspapers seize upon the story. The murder of Annie Chapman is front-page news. The details are too horrific to ignore, too shocking for even the most hardened Londoners to dismiss. And for the first time, people begin to realize, this isn't random. This isn't some drunken murder, some street brawl turned deadly. This is a pattern. Someone is stalking these women. Someone who knows how to kill with precision. Someone who is taking trophies. Jack the Ripper has returned. And Whitechapel is terrified. The fear gripping Whitechapel is now undeniable. 2 women have been butchered in the streets in a way no one has ever seen before. The working girls who once laughed and drank in the dimly lit pubs now huddle together, speaking in hushed tones. They walk in pairs, glancing over their shoulders. The police patrol the streets in greater numbers, but it does little to ease the tension. Whoever this killer is, he is careful. He is invisible. The newspapers fuel the growing hysteria. Their headlines scream of a monstrous figure stalking the slums, a murderer who kills with the precision of a surgeon and the madness of a demon. The people of London demand answers, but the police have none. They have no leads, no suspects, just corpses left in the dark. Then a letter arrives. It is September 27th, 1888. The Central News Agency, a well-known London newspaper office, receives an envelope. The writing is neat, deliberate. The words chilling. "Dear boss," the letter begins. The tone is mocking, almost playful. The writer claims responsibility for the murders, taunting the police for their failure to catch him. He promises more deaths, more bloodshed. And then at the bottom, he signs it with a name that will become infamous. Jack the Ripper. It is the first time the world sees this name in print. It is the first time the killer speaks, if it is truly him at all. At first, the police dismiss the letter as a hoax. They believe it is the work of a journalist or some twisted prankster trying to stir up more panic. But then another letter arrives. And another. The killer, if it really is him, seems to enjoy the game, feeding the fear, watching the chaos unfold. Then comes the most chilling line of all. "I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games." It is a threat, a promise, and within days he will make good on it. The city is paralyzed with fear. The name Jack the Ripper is now infamous, whispered in every pub, printed in every newspaper. But the worst is yet to come. September 30th, 1888. It is just past midnight, and Whitechapel is restless. The streets are filled with the usual sights, drunken men stumbling out of taverns, prostitutes lingering in the shadows, looking for their next customer. The night air is thick with the stink of unwashed bodies, beer, and horse manure. No one knows that before the sun rises, 2 more women will be dead. The first murder, Elizabeth Stride. 1 a.m. Dutfield's Yard, off Burner Street. A man named Louis Deemschutz, a club steward, guides his horse-drawn cart through the gates. It is late, and the street is quiet. But as his horse suddenly shies away, Deemschutz pulls on the reins, squinting into the darkness. A shape lies on the ground, barely visible in the dim gaslight. Deemschutz climbs down from his cart and takes a cautious step forward. A woman, lying on her side. He leans in closer. That's when he sees it, blood pooling beneath her, dark against the damp ground. Her throat is slashed, a single deep wound. But unlike the previous victims, she has not been mutilated further. Something interrupted the killer. The timing is impossibly close. Just minutes before Deemschutz arrived, Jack the Ripper was here, knife in hand, standing over Elizabeth Stride as her life drained away. But he did not have time to complete his gruesome work. He was forced to flee, slipping into the shadows before anyone could see him. The police are called, but they are too late. The killer has vanished. And he is not finished. The second murder, Catherine Eddowes. 45 minutes later, barely a mile away, another woman walks alone through the streets. Her name is Catherine Eddowes. Hours earlier, she had been arrested for public drunkenness. The police had locked her up in a cell to sober up, and at 1 a.m., she was released. Before she left, the officer asked if she could take care of herself. With a laugh, she replied, "Yes, I shall get a damn fine hiding when I get home." She never made it home. At 1:45 a.m., just minutes after Elizabeth Stride's body was discovered, a constable patrolling Mitre Square stumbles upon a horror beyond anything Whitechapel has yet seen. Catherine Eddowes lies on her back, her throat cut like the others. But this time, the killer had time to work. Her face has been slashed, deep cuts carved into her cheeks. Her abdomen is torn open, her intestines pulled out and placed beside her body. And something even more chilling, her left kidney is missing. Whoever Jack the Ripper is, he does not just kill. He takes. The police now know, without a doubt, that they are dealing with a man who thrives on violence. A man who moves unseen, slipping through the streets like a ghost. A man who, despite the growing number of officers patrolling Whitechapel, cannot be stopped. And before he vanishes into the fog, he leaves one last clue. The cryptic message. At 3 a.m., a bloody piece of Catherine Eddowes' apron is found in Golston Street. It is soaked with her blood, deliberately discarded. Above it, written in chalk on a nearby wall, are the words, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." What does it mean? Is it a message from the killer? A taunt? A red herring? The police never determine its significance. In a desperate attempt to prevent anti-Semitic riots, the writing is erased before it can be properly documented. The sun rises over Whitechapel, revealing a city on the edge of hysteria. 2 women dead in the span of an hour. The killer slipping through their fingers once again. Jack the Ripper is no longer just a murderer. He is a legend, a specter haunting the streets of London. And he is still out there. By dawn on September 30th, 1888, the people of Whitechapel wake to the shocking news. Jack the Ripper has struck twice in one night. The murders of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes confirm what many had feared. This is not a man who will stop. This is a predator, moving unseen, choosing his victims at will. The panic spreads faster than ever before. Women refuse to walk the streets alone. Lodging houses lock their doors earlier. The men of Whitechapel, poor and desperate as they may be, speak of forming vigilante groups, determined to hunt the monster themselves. The newspapers feed the hysteria with gruesome descriptions of the bodies, and one question echoes in every conversation. Why haven't the police caught him? The truth is brutal, because they have nothing. A city in fear. The police force, led by Chief Inspector Donald Swanson and Detective Inspector Frederick Aberline, is overwhelmed. Hundreds of officers patrol the streets every night. They question butchers, slaughterhouse workers, doctors, anyone with the skill to disembowel a body. They search lodging houses, inspect asylum records, interview known criminals. But there are no witnesses. No one sees him come. No one sees him leave. Theories spread like wildfire. Some say Jack the Ripper is a doctor, given his apparent knowledge of anatomy. Others insist he is a butcher, someone accustomed to blood. Some believe he is a foreigner, an outsider taking advantage of Whitechapel's chaos. But the worst theory, the one that lingers in the minds of the people, is the most terrifying of all. What if he is one of them? What if Jack the Ripper walks among them every day, his face familiar, his voice known? What if he is a man they greet in the marketplace, pass on the street, serve in the pubs? The police do not know, and the killings do not stop. The suspects begin to emerge. As the investigation grows, names begin to surface. Suspicious men, drifters, lunatics, some fit the profile, some do not. Some will be arrested, interrogated, and then released. Among them, Montague John Druitt, a well-educated barrister and schoolteacher, found dead in the Thames just weeks after the last murder. Some officers believe he was the killer, taking his own life to avoid capture. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber with known mental illness, later committed to an asylum. He was reportedly seen with a prostitute around the time of the murders, but no evidence links him to the crimes. John Pizer, a Jewish shoemaker known as Leather Apron, arrested due to local rumors but quickly released when his alibi checked out. Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, a convicted serial killer who poisoned women. Some later claim he whispered, "I am Jack the," before he was hanged. But there is one problem: he was in prison during the Ripper murders. And so the search continues, leading nowhere. The letters keep coming. As if the murders are not horrifying enough, the letters keep arriving. First, "Dear Boss," where the name Jack the Ripper is first used. Then, "Saucy Jackie," mocking the police after the double murder. But the worst letter of all arrives on October 16th. A small, stained package is sent to George Lusk, leader of the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Inside is a letter titled "From Hell," and a box containing half a human kidney. The writer claims he has eaten the other half. Experts debate whether the kidney truly belonged to Catherine Eddowes. Some believe it is a hoax. But real or not, it serves its purpose. The fear, already unbearable, now turns into full-blown terror. Jack the Ripper is not just killing. He is playing a game. And so far, he is winning. By November 1888, Whitechapel is drowning in fear. 5 women have been brutally murdered, their bodies left in the open like some grotesque warning. The newspapers print every detail, fueling the hysteria. The police are no closer to catching the killer. The city is suffocating under the weight of a single, unanswerable question. When will he strike again? Then, on November 9th, Jack the Ripper commits his most horrifying murder yet. The victim, Mary Jane Kelly, is different from the other victims. Unlike Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, and Catherine Eddowes, women forced to survive on the streets, Mary has a room of her own. A small, single-room lodging at 13 Miller's Court, off Dorset Street. It is nothing more than a cramped space with a bed, a fireplace, and a single window. But it is hers. At just 25 years old, Mary is the youngest of the Ripper's known victims. She is also the most mysterious. No one knows exactly where she came from. She speaks of a childhood in Ireland, of time spent in France. Some believe she once lived in a high-class brothel. Others think she simply made it all up. What is certain is that by 1888, she is a prostitute in Whitechapel, living on the edge of desperation. On the night of November 8th, she is seen drinking at the 10 Bells pub, as she often does. She is heard singing in her room later that night, her voice carrying through the thin walls. "A violet I plucked from my mother's grave." It is the last time she is heard alive. The discovery. At 10:45 a.m. on November 9th, Mary's landlord, John McCarthy, sends his assistant, Thomas Bowyer, to collect overdue rent. Bowyer walks to Miller's Court, knocks on the door. No answer. He knocks again, harder this time. Still nothing. Growing impatient, he steps to the window. The glass is broken, covered with a rag to keep out the cold. He pulls it aside and peers inside. Then he stumbles back, nearly collapsing into the alley. Inside the room, on the bed, is what once was Mary Jane Kelly. The most brutal murder yet. When the police arrive, even the most hardened officers struggle to process what they are seeing. The brutality of Mary's murder is beyond anything the Ripper has done before. Her throat is slashed, nearly severing her head. Her face is unrecognizable, carved, slashed, destroyed. Her chest is cut open, her breasts removed. Her stomach is torn apart, her organs removed and placed around the room. Strips of flesh are peeled from her thighs and placed on the bedside table. Even her heart is missing. Unlike his previous victims, Jack the Ripper had time. In the privacy of Mary's tiny room, he was free to indulge in his most sadistic fantasies. No patrols, no witnesses, no risk of being interrupted. He did not just kill her, he obliterated her. The end of the Ripper's reign. Mary Jane Kelly is the last confirmed victim of Jack the Ripper. After her murder, the killings stop. The newspapers expect another corpse. The police wait for another woman to be found in the early morning hours, her body torn apart. But the streets remain silent. Jack the Ripper, the monster who held London in terror, vanishes just as suddenly as he appeared. Did he die? Was he arrested for another crime? Did he flee the city, escaping justice forever? No one knows. But Whitechapel will never forget. The murder of Mary Jane Kelly is the most savage killing Whitechapel has ever seen. Even the hardened police officers, who have seen mutilated bodies before, struggle to comprehend the level of brutality. The city is shaken to its core. For weeks, people expect another murder. Women still move in pairs, glancing over their shoulders. The police remain on high alert, convinced that the Ripper will strike again. But the days pass. Then weeks. Then months. And nothing happens. Jack the Ripper, the killer who had stalked London's streets with surgical precision, seems to have disappeared. But the fear does not fade. The endless investigation. Scotland Yard refuses to let the case die. Inspector Frederick Aberline, exhausted but determined, continues chasing leads, interrogating suspects, re-examining evidence. But there is nothing. No witnesses, no arrests. The list of suspects grows longer, yet none can be tied definitively to the crimes. Meanwhile, the newspapers refuse to let the public forget. Sensational headlines still scream his name. Journalists continue to publish theories. Books and pamphlets dissect every detail of the case. Everyone has an opinion. Some blame doctors, others blame immigrants, some whisper about a conspiracy among the elite. But the truth remains maddeningly out of reach. The panic turns to frustration. For months, Whitechapel has lived in terror. But as time passes without another murder, the fear begins to transform into anger, into desperation. The people want answers. They want someone to blame. Protests break out. Accusations fly. Some blame the police for their failures. Others turn against the Jewish community, fueled by anti-Semitic rumors that one of their own might be the killer. Innocent men are beaten in the streets. The city is unraveling, and there is no one to answer for the blood that has been spilled. The case officially closes. In 1892, after years of dead ends, Scotland Yard closes the case. Jack the Ripper has not killed again, and without new leads, the investigation can go no further. The murders of Whitechapel become the most infamous cold case in history. But no one forgets. For decades, for over a century, the mystery lingers. Experts, detectives, amateur sleuths, generation after generation, people obsess over the case, searching for the identity of the man who walked through the fog, knife in hand, and vanished into the darkness. But the truth is lost to time. Jack the Ripper was never caught, and perhaps he never will be. The Whitechapel murders have ended, but the obsession is just beginning. For decades, investigators, journalists, and armchair detectives will dissect every piece of evidence, desperate to answer one question. Who is Jack the Ripper? The police suspects. Scotland Yard compiled a list of possible suspects, but none were ever charged. Some of the most notorious names include Montague Druitt, a barrister and schoolteacher, found drowned in the Thames in December 1888. Some officers believed his suicide marked the end of the killings, but no evidence linked him to the crimes. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber with a history of mental illness. He was committed to an asylum in 1891, where he reportedly ranted about women. In modern times, DNA evidence from a shawl supposedly linked to Catherine Eddowes suggested Kosminski's involvement, but the results remain controversial. Michael Ostrog, a Russian conman and thief. He was in and out of asylums, but there was no proof he was a murderer. Dr. Francis Tumblety, a quack doctor from America with a deep hatred of women, particularly prostitutes. He fled London after being arrested for an unrelated crime, sparking theories that he was the Ripper. Despite the police's efforts, no man was ever convicted. The more extreme theories. As time passed, new theories emerged, some logical, some wild. The lack of hard evidence made the case a breeding ground for speculation. Was he a member of the royal family? Some claimed that Prince Albert Victor, Queen Victoria's grandson, had gone mad and carried out the murders, protected by the British government. Historians largely dismissed this as nonsense. Was he a doctor? The precise nature of the mutilations led some to believe Jack the Ripper had medical training. Surgeons and physicians became key suspects. Was he a woman? A radical theory suggested the killer was actually a female midwife, able to move through Whitechapel unnoticed. The idea, though intriguing, never gained serious traction. Was he a foreigner? Many Londoners blamed immigrants, particularly the Jewish community. The writing on the wall near Catherine Eddowes' murder scene fueled this belief, though it was likely a red herring. The From Hell letter and the missing kidney. One of the biggest mysteries remains the From Hell letter. Sent to George Lusk along with a human kidney, it raised a terrifying question. Did Jack the Ripper eat part of his victim? Experts have debated for over a century whether the kidney truly belonged to Catherine Eddowes. If it did, it would confirm a chilling reality. Jack the Ripper was not just a killer, but a man who took trophies, possibly for consumption. But without definitive forensic proof, it remains speculation. The Ripper's legacy. In the years after the murders, Jack the Ripper became more than a name. He became a legend. The case changed policing forever, pushing forensic techniques forward. It exposed the brutal conditions of Whitechapel, forcing society to confront the horrors of poverty. And it gave birth to a true crime fascination that still grips the world today. But the biggest mystery remains. Who was he? Despite countless theories, endless books, and modern forensic advancements, no one has ever proven the identity of Jack the Ripper. He was a man who walked through the fog, butchered 5 women, and disappeared, leaving behind only blood, fear, and a name that still haunts history. More than a century has passed since Jack the Ripper stalked the streets of Whitechapel. His victims, Polly Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly, are long buried, their names etched into history as symbols of a brutal, unsolved horror. The fog of time has swallowed the killer, leaving behind only questions. Did he die? Was he arrested for another crime? Did he flee, starting anew in another city, another country? No one knows. The case of Jack the Ripper remains the world's most infamous unsolved mystery. Despite countless books, documentaries, and modern forensic attempts, the truth remains elusive. The identity of history's most notorious serial killer is lost, perhaps forever. But what if the answer is still out there? What if the final clue is hidden in an old police file, in an overlooked witness statement, in a piece of evidence dismissed long ago? Could technology one day provide an answer, or will Jack the Ripper remain nothing more than a ghost, a nightmare without a face? One thing is certain, as long as people seek the truth, as long as his crimes remain unsolved, Jack the Ripper will never truly fade from history. And if you want to uncover more of history's darkest and most terrifying mysteries, subscribe now. Because this story isn't the only one that will keep you up at night.